everyone.
Morning.
All righty. Looks like we are all here. So I am going to just do really brief, quick introductions, and then we will have a great chat about storytelling for games, which thankfully Mike has agreed to help with moderation, as he knows that this is not my strong suit. So I just want to say thank you to all of our attendees that are here and that submitted questions. We really appreciate you being with us. Just a few quick notes before I do introductions. This is being recorded and will be available on YouTube for later viewing. Another big thing to note is that our panelists are always working on projects and collaborations throughout the industry. So there may be some questions that they need to pass on that they can't dive into. So we just ask that you respect that from them. And without further ado, Marcin Blacha has been writing games for nearly 20 years. He started as an author of pen and paper RPGs, worked as a designer on a series of games about The Witcher. Geralt was the lead writer of The Witcher 3 and the story director of Cyberpunk 2077. He's an avid reader and a picky gamer. Bonnie Jean Ma is the franchise narrative director for Gears of War at Microsoft's Coalition Studio, where she oversees narrative development on Gears game titles and extended universe publications. She most recently shipped Gears 5 and Gears Tactics. Previous roles include narrative lead on Age of Empires 4 at Relic Entertainment, narrative producer on Gears of War 4, and writer on Relic's Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine. Bonnie Jean brings a background in film and television as a writer, director, and producer to her work in game development. And
Morning.
And Michael Stackpole is a favorite of the center. Michael Stackpole is a multiple New York Times bestselling author of over 40 fantasy and science fiction novels. His best-known books are written in the Star Wars universe, including I, Jedi and Rogue Squadron, as well as the X-Wing graphic novel series. He has also written in the Conan, Pathfinder, Battletech, and World of Warcraft universes, among others. Welcome. Thank you all for being here. And we will get started. So I'm going to start with a quick softball question, and then we can kind of dive into conversation. Can each of you maybe talk about where your interest in writing for games, either through narrative design or writing books about games, came from, and how you got started in the industry?
Is it for this question? Is it for everybody?
Yeah, it's for everyone.
So I will start. For me, it started with pen and paper role playing. As a kid, I had my fellow kids, and we were playing various pen and paper role playing games. And at some point, I started to write some modules, scenarios, and articles for Polish magazines about role-playing. Then I was hired to work in a Polish publishing house, which is right now more like a board game publishing house. And I was writing games, but in a form of books, so role-playing games like D&D. So we made Neuroshima. Probably it's our most popular game, but it's popular mostly in Poland. It wasn't translated to English, and from this publishing house, I was hired to CD Projekt Red to start to work on The Witcher 1. It was like 15 years ago, and back in those days, there were no video game designers in Poland, but there was a huge community of people connected to pen and paper role-playing games. So they were looking for people like me I was already a writer. They hired me, and that's how I started to work in CD Projekt Red. And from this point, I was writing the Witcher games.
Nice. Should I jump in? I'll jump in. Okay. I always knew that I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to make money as a writer, and I didn't quite know. Film was what I was originally. Mike, it's not that funny. We can make a living. I was a huge science fiction and fantasy fan growing up as a reader, and also Star Wars, Star Trek. Give me all of it. And I started out in communications, so kind of learned, really how to be a better writer just through writing for every single thing I could get my hands on, and worked with really good editors who made me a better writer overall. Went back to school to study film, started making films with people, thought I'd be a better writer if I actually learned how to produce, and that was good to get a sense of all sides of how story can affect every other department on a film or television production. And then I got I got tired of not making a hell of a lot of money, and also finding that in Vancouver, a lot of which is where I'm based, Vancouver, Canada. We do a lot of film production here for science fiction shows, but all of the creative, all of the above the line work is done in Los Angeles or in Toronto. And I was feeling like I'm not quite sure how I'm ever going to do the kind of writing that I really am passionate about. And then a friend of mine from film was a producer in the game industry at Relic Entertainment. And he asked, well, have you ever thought of writing for games? And, I'm like, no. And they asked me to submit writing samples. They're like, oh, we like your stuff. We had this full-time gig for a narrative designer. Would you like to apply? And I'm like, sure. Went and Googled what is a narrative designer, and then realized, oh my gosh, there's this amazing career out there for people who love storytelling in an interactive media. And so I went in, was hired at Relic, and they took a chance on me because they knew I could write and that I could learn about the game development process. And that was probably 12 years ago, and I have never been happier to have found a home in games because I can be a storyteller here. So yeah, that's my summary.
Very good. I laughed merely because one of the jokes going around the gaming paper and pencil gaming industry here in the United States is that when you become a game designer, you take a vow of poverty, and everyone in the industry helps you keep it. And so, and that's certainly where I got my start. While I was still in college, I did a solo adventure for Flying Buffalo's game Tunnels and Trolls, and they published that, and then I got a job with them working as a editor and a designer. That took me to a lot of conventions where I got to know other companies, other people, and from there I met the guys at FASA and got a chance doing BattleTech novels. And that was also the whole process of working for them on BattleTech was one where we would have development meetings and we'd set where the future was going to go. And so it was, as somebody who's going to be writing in the universe, it was a lot of fun to be there and helping set what was going to show up in the universe. That made my job much easier. So.
Thank you all for that. So to kind of dive in, what are elements that make a gaming property attractive for adaptation? And this would apply to any of you that want to answer.
Okay, I'll jump in. We'll all take turns. We'll have an awkward silence at the beginning, and then we'll jump in. So this is what makes a property good for adaptation. I think if we feel like there are untold stories that exist beyond the confines of the game, I think like there are some games that are very focused on telling one particular story, and it just feels like, well, that's complete if you kind of played that game and beginning, middle, and end, and you feel like that character's journey was done. For the Gears of War world, for example, the very first game itself set out this giant world that you just saw little edges of. And I think it's when, as a player, you can see, oh, there's these characters over here that I just meet for a moment, but they actually looked really interesting. And if you come away kind of playing a game and realizing that there's all these other areas that I have traveled through that I think that I want to know more about, then it's a good sign that there's probably lots of untold stories that you could tell. But you have to be creative in which stories, as developers and IP holders, that you pick, because I mean, one of our key pillars is that if we're going to tell a story that's outside of the game, it needs to be meaningful to the people who love the game in the first place. Like, it can't just be, you know, a character who was a cool character design, but players weren't really interested in them in the first place. So you have to actually do some research and understand what you think makes your world worth expanding, but also what do you think the players are reacting to already that you can build upon. Thanks.
Yeah, let me jump in real quickly. I think when you're looking at a property, absolutely, you've got to have enough depth there that the players and the readers, or however you're going to appeal to them, want to see more. That there's always that space beyond the hill. There's always that other adventure that could be told and could be a part of what goes on. And I think it's kind of funny with games, because in games, the player himself is sort of is sort of becoming the character. You know, that's how you interface with the world. So having a bunch of interesting characters that people can jump into, that they can see themselves as, and that they can form relationships with, I think really broadens and provides more of that impetus. So if there's stuff there to explore and interesting characters to explore with, I think that's a real strong candidate for doing more with.
And when it comes to me, for me, the most important part of adaptation is to translate the experience to a different medium. So with games, it's a little bit easier because you play the game and the experience is very vivid. So let's say that the games are different dishes and you try this one, this one, this one. And at some point you say, it's delicious. What's the ingredients? And you check the ingredients and you know that, oh, okay, so it is composed in that way. I know all the ingredients, but they are composed in a very subtle way, and it really gives this unique, delicious taste. So this act of experiencing and translating the experience, I think it's the most important thing, and it applies to the game in a very specific way, because in the games you are in the character, so this experience is amplified.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
So I think kind of coming off that question, what is the process for adapting a novel into a game? Obviously, there's things that you're going to keep, things that you might tweak and change, and you might actually be telling a completely new story. So can we maybe talk about what that process looks like?
I think this is going to be Marcin. I think that's your question.
Okay, so we did it. We've translated the books about Geralt, the Witcher, to the game. And what was the process? So when it started, the books about the Witcher were very popular in Poland, and we were all fans of those books. And we really were very into those books. So we knew them very deeply, I would say. And when we knew that we have to make a game based on those books, the first thing that came to our minds was that we don't want to repeat those stories because they were, sacred for us. We were really fans. So we knew that we need a new story, but with the known characters. And it was quite fun because everybody was imagining those characters in a different way, and we had many brainstorms, discussion how to adapt it into the game. But eventually we came to an agreement, and it was starting from this point. It was the easy part because everybody knew what's good in the books, and we were really hyped about those characters, about the possibility of making stories with them. It was like writing fanfics, and someone wanted to pay us for it, so it was really cool. And we finished up with we have finished up with the first game about The Witcher, and we were like, I don't know how to say it, but we were so excited about it. We were really hyped, and we knew that it's something great because in this moment we could participate in this world of Andrzej Sapkowski, who is the author of the books, and we could bring something new to this world of The Witcher. And that's all.
Yeah, I've done a couple of computer games where we had to adapt other properties, and I remember for the 20th anniversary Star Trek game, sort of our mission statement when we launched into it was, because it was the original series, they had a 3-year. We saw 3 years of their 5-year mission. We decided we were going to make season 4. We were going to do the 4th year, and it was very much that same thing of finding those elements that people really, really liked, and dragging them back in, which is cool. So a question I think for you guys is, when you look at your properties and when you look at the things, how do you define what those elements are? I mean, do you know for Witcher, Bonnie, do you know for Gears of War what the elements are that make it the Gears brand, or where the elements are that make it the Witcher brand?
Well, it's I can talk about Gears because it's actually it's something that you need to do collectively. It's actually a question that is very difficult to answer, and everyone will have a slightly different version of their answer depending on what they think about the game they make. So as a leadership team, we have kind of come together and really analyzed like what is the emotional core of Gears of War, and what are we communicating to our partners who work with us, like our novelists, our film production companies. Like, how do we explain what makes Gears of War Gears? And it's actually quite an interesting process, and it's hard to do because how do you distill like, because from an art perspective it could be destroyed beauty. From story perspective it can be another thing, but like for Gears we realized that there are some key elements such as these are war stories. No matter what else we do, we're going to have war at the heart of what the story is. They're stories about brotherhood or found family, like the people who you are with become your family, and that's the most important relationships that you have in our stories. The world is a brutal world, so we're not doing brutality for gratuitous sake, but we have a reason for making this a difficult world to live in, and the world is providing challenges that our characters have to overcome. So elements like that we actually had to dissect. Well, does this apply to gameplay? Yes. Does it apply to the feeling that you get when you're playing the game? Yes. How can we communicate those type of feelings to our partners who are coming in, who who are trying to say like, well, what is Gears of War? So we have realized that it's on us to do our homework and be able to explain that, because we've had we've had times when we haven't explained it clearly enough to partners, and we've had to course correct. So it's very good, and it's also it's centering for us, because then we can say, okay, we know something's not feeling quite right. What about this isn't feeling right? And then we can kind of go back and say, oh, well, this is feeling like our world is about fighting monsters. This is about, humans fighting humans. Why doesn't this feel quite right? Oh, I see. So yeah, it's a way for us to kind of help the people, the writers and artists that we work with externally, but also for ourselves to make sure that we're staying true to our brand.
Marcin, was that part of the process you guys went through? So you said all of you were fans of the Witcher books. Did you have a big meeting where everybody sat down and said, no, if it's going to be a Witcher thing, it has to have this? And how did you sort those out? What was that process like?
It was surprisingly easy because we knew that everybody knew what's good in the books and also what's not so good. So we knew that we need those characters. We knew that we need this specific protagonist, a monster hunter. We knew that we need this grim and gritty world and stories about bad things happening to bad people. And it was so close to our heart that we were all in tune. Sometimes there were discussions, like, for example, shall we bring zombies to this world? No, it's a sacrilege. No, but zombies are cool. But I think, in fact, we all knew what's important and what's in the core of this of those books.
Very good. One of the things that whenever you're working in a creative property that has to be done, especially when you've got a series going on, is something that I think the fans love to hate, and that is retconning. When you have to go in and you said something in game one, and now it has to be different in game two. What are the techniques that you found to work around that, or to try and minimize that? And what sort of reactions do you get when you have to go through and correct one of those things? So, I mean, either one.
I will jump in. It's difficult. So I think it's not a pleasant thing to face, but so on Gears, I've always been thankful that where details could be left out, like the original story creators and we continue to allow negative space. So we actually don't want to fill in all of the corners of the room with paint, because we're going to find ourselves in a corner a few years down the line. So by not defining absolutely everything about the world, we then have opportunities for storytelling in the future. But there are times when we do have to consider, retconning is such a dirty word, but it's something that happens. But I'll give you an example of where I think the intention was a good one. So Karen Travis is one of our authors on the Gears of War series, the original books. And there's a whole book that she wrote about a key battle in the Pendulum Wars. And so that was depicted in the novel. But then we wanted to use that battle as part of our prologue for Gears of War 4. And we knew that we weren't going to be able to portray it exactly as Karen had done it in the books. But we wanted to make sure that we were honoring the intention of what she was putting down. So the details might have been different, but what was happening with the characters and why they were doing it, we worked very hard to kind of make sure that we were staying true to the intention of that story. So it wasn't retconning per se, but it was adapting something that would work better for storytelling in the game while still remaining true to the intention of the author and her work.
Marcin, what experience have you had in fixing things?
I mean, for us, the worst enemies of, let's say, The Witcher 3 were the authors of The Witcher 2, and for The Witcher 2 were the authors for The Witcher 1, because usually our games end with different endings. So, for example, some player may have ending A, another player may have ending B, etc. And what we do, we just do some different beginnings, or we make some flags in the game that let the player know that the saved game he loaded is important in this game and nothing has changed. But obviously it doesn't mean that we don't make mistakes. And I remember one situation when we had to patch the game because we forgot about some important character. I won't tell which character it was, but we had to make a quick patch to change some information and to make sure that everything fits with the previous installment. So it's very differently. And when it comes to the books, when we adapt them, in case of The Witcher, and I think it's even more true in case of Cyberpunk, sometimes we don't try to be very strict. And some things in Cyberpunk, for example, the lore about Johnny Silverhand from the handbooks and Johnny Silverhand in the games, it's very different. And we don't really care about it because we know that in the games we have Johnny that we needed, and it's more or less the Johnny from the books. And our Johnny, it is good because he entertains the player, he fits the story, and he doesn't directly contradict the Johnny, this person from the handbook. So sometimes we just say, okay, we have to do it because the story, the entertainment, the experience it is the most important thing. So we have to change something.
Yeah, I in working on the X-Wing novels for Lucasfilm and Bantam at the time. This was when they were really getting their publishing program. It was before the brand new movies, so they were really getting stuff squared away and getting their continuity squared away. And this happened to both Tim Zahn and myself when they would notice a glitch in the continuity. And we were working on a book. I remember getting a call from Lucasfilm going, "By the way, can you fix this?" Where in the right after the movie, right after the movies came out, they killed a character, General Jan Dodona, and then in a Dark Horse comic, showing up 5 years later, he's alive and he's running things. And so I got the call going, can you take care of it? Can you fix this? And I was like, sure, yeah, this is not a problem. But as a game designer, one of the things that I learned very, very early on working on BattleTech was that you never speak in absolutes. And if you can, you always speak from the point of view of someone in the world so they can be wrong. And this gives you, Bonnie, you were talking about negative space. This gives you plenty of room to play around and build expectations, and yet, cover yourself in case you do need to make that that big change. When telling stories through games, what do you think is the chief advantage that doing it as a game has over some of the other media that, whether it's movies or comics or novels? I mean, do you see, what are the things that you can do in a game that aren't really accessible to those other mediums? And how does that, I mean, are those things that you really keep in the forefront of your mind to make sure that you hit? So we'll start with Marcin. There we go.
Okay. So I think the biggest advantage the games have is this interactivity. So when you can make some choices, because the game is about choices. So I think the best story for a game is a story when the choices really matter. And there are obviously good movies and good books that are linear. And when you direct a movie, you can just lead it as you want from point A to point B. And when you design a game, you just, what you do is you provide some possibilities for this ultimate director, and this director is the player. So when you make a game and when you prepare a story for a game, the best story is a story that focuses on the main character, obviously, and that kind of story that may branch like a tree and produce other sub-stories and other digressions, some side quests, whatever.
Okay. Bonnie?
Yeah, I'll add on to the idea of the interactive aspect of it. Like when I'm consuming a film, I'm passive. I want to just experience, like tell me what's going on. But when you're playing a game, like you're leaning in, you are driving the action. And it's what I love about storytelling in games is that it's not just you're not just telling a story, you're actually helping support an experience. So the story is working hand in hand with gameplay, and you're immersed in it, and you, like as Marcin said, you are making choices, but it's not just through the story, it's also how am I going to approach a problem, using gameplay to kind of get through this obstacle that the world has thrown at me. Like it's up to me to figure this out. So even though I'm embodying a character, I as a participant are responsible for how this is going to turn out. So I just think it's as a player, you are becoming immersed in this experience, and the game designers are putting together, they're using color and light and audio and the story to kind of help you feel immersed in this totally different world. So yeah, but you have to be in the mood. Like I'm often in a mood, I just give me a movie, I just want to live somebody else's life and just consume it and enjoy it. But other times, like, yeah, like I fired up Cyberpunk 2077 last night. Like I'm in that world, I'm part of it. And so yeah, it's just a different way of consuming stories, which is great about games.
Yeah, I think what you're talking at is that with the games, the player has to actively do something, and it's more than turning a page or hitting the start play button. And so you have a built-in sense of accomplishment, as you do those things, and even the little tiny decisions you make about how to arrange a character's gear or little choices to make here. We all are in games and we go, oh, that's my favorite gun, or that's the thing I really enjoy, and you get that dopamine hit again when you recover, that item or things. And so there is that engagement in games that you can't just get in books and movies, I think.
Well, and that's why it presents such a different challenge to writers, because I think, as writers, we're often, accustomed to thinking linearly. And you're thinking about, I am going to tell this one particular story. But in games, you have to exercise this whole new muscle, which is thinking about how is this going to actually affect the player. And like with branching storylines, it's like choose your own adventure at the simplest level. Like you're deciding something and it's going to affect things later on. But it's simple things like you as a writer need to be flexible for when the budget on the game means that a third of it has been cut. So it's not, you kind of have to have an attitude shift. It's not like I've done my script, I'm handing it over, I'm done. It's like, no, actually, you are part of the process from start to finish, and you need to be flexible about the story that you're trying to tell. and your writing itself. Like, you've written this wonderful monologue, but you know what? It has to be cut by like, 3/4, because the player is going to just run through this. And so if you want them to know something, do it fast. So yeah, it's humbling, I think, for writers who haven't worked in games before to understand that it's not all about their words. It's about the greater experience for the player.
Right, and for some of the players, all the wonderful words are not going to make any difference whatsoever. They just
No.
want to blow things up.
Yes, that's what I want to do. So yeah.
But it would be so cool to have movies with a character creator. So you make your character and then you watch the movie. One day I was thinking about it, and it's something that will change the movie business one day.
Oh, absolutely. It's kind of like, I know every Christmas there's always advertised, you can buy a book with your child's name in it. And you give them the details, and all of a sudden, Santa comes to visit, and there it is, right? And the kids are there and everything. That would be kind of wild for movies. Ashley, I know that you had some questions that have been offered ahead of time. Should we hit some of those?
So we're actually kind of answering them as we move through. A lot of them are, how did you get started, and what is your process like? But a big one that we're getting, and I feel like we keep kind of touching on it. And I asked this one because I actually was picking Bonnie's brain about it on a phone call a couple months ago. But how do you keep track of a property, and as you're spawning media like games and movies and books and short stories and comics off of these properties? How do you make sure that you are lining things up, and you're not completely spinning off into space with your characters?
I can probably talk about that. So it's very tricky, and there's not one good answer, unfortunately. So I think on Gears, we're fortunate that we aren't like a huge franchise like Halo or any of the Blizzard games like World of Warcraft, where they've had a ton of novels. Like Mike, you probably could speak to
Oh
that.
yeah.
But they've just had so many novels and comics and everything produced. So those teams actually do have dedicated lore management teams, which is an incredible thing. So they have people who are creating lore Bibles and that documentation. We're much more bootstrapped. Like, we are constantly having to support the games, and so it's tricky because it is like it relies on people on your team to be up to speed. Like, I better know what is going on in the novels and the comics, and make sure that I have people on my team that I can ask. But it's we need to serve as a resource to our external writers if they have questions, and then it often becomes kind of a communal effort for us to go. It's like, let's do a research project, and we've never thought about like how many shots does a hammer burst issue with every blast. It's like, I will go ask the gameplay team, and oh, I didn't know that. So yeah, it's like, on the one hand, it's helpful to have a team that can organize this stuff. When you don't have that team, then it really is the responsibility of all of us to make sure that we're finding out the information as best we can. We're going to make mistakes, but we just try to do the best we can. And we do worry about it. Like, I was working with a novelist, and I realized, like, we were near like the last draft or something, and I realized, oh my gosh, I think this one thing I thought was okay maybe isn't. And it was like midnight. I'm pacing up and down my kitchen trying to figure out, like, how can I make this reconcile with our world? And it's like, oh, I think we can do it if we think about it this way. And so working with external creatives and writers, as IP holders, we also have to be flexible and think, okay, the writer has this incredible idea. They want to use this character this way. How can we support that and make it work? So, yeah.
I've done a novel for World of Warcraft, and they do have they have multiple lore masters. I mean, there. And I remember going over to Southern California to talk to people about the novel, and I was there for 2 days. And the second day, I got a 6-hour crash course in the history of Azeroth and everything that had ever happened. You know, I mean, I got a degree in history, so I'm used to compiling all of those things. But boy, I mean, that was just kind of an overload. Marcin, what do you guys do with continuity? Because you're making up new stuff, and yet you've got all the novels. You know, are there? And are you in touch with the author? Do you know what he's currently working on, so there are no surprises? Or
so yes, we are in touch with Mr. Sapkowski. He doesn't produce many new novels, so we base on 2 books of short stories and 5 novels, and that's not a huge number. And in addition, his work, I mean, Mr. Sapkowski's work is very well documented, because the books were way before the game. So the fans created like wikis, encyclopedias. There is even a dictionary of elder speech. So that was okay. But on the other hand, sometimes we give a license, like for example, to Dark Horse for the comics, and sometimes they base on our games. So we have another department that obviously it's BizDev. In our company, it's BizDev that handles it. But obviously they ask us sometimes, is it canonical or is it not? So we read scenarios and we give our opinions. And basically everything is our heads. We are like a huge hive mind of the lore, and sometimes we are not entirely sure who is right, so we check it in the book, but more or less I think we remember about stuff. Also, those books are not really very like rich in lore. There are obviously some events described, and there is history, and there is even an ancient history, but they are like a very easily remembered things, so it's not a problem for us.
Yeah, I do remember an embarrassing moment for me. A year ago, I was at a Battletech meeting, and they were discussing some point of something that happened in history. And I said, really, who wrote that? That's so stupid. And it was me. So then I had to figure out why I was actually brilliant in doing that. And since it's canon, we're kind of stuck with it anyway. So, but yeah, that gets kind of crazy. Bonnie, for you in working with a novelist, or maybe in general, in working with new people who want to come in and work on the games or work on a property, what's the process? I know that I always get asked, how did you get a start?
Right.
What is it that how does how do you pick writers to do novels, or how does the publisher do it, or anything? How could someone get their start?
So for novelists, we also have a licensing team. They set up agreements with publishers such as comic book publishers or novel houses, and so typically we will look to the publisher and say, we've talked about what kind of property we are. Please recommend some authors who you think would be a good fit for us. But at the same time, we're going off and also doing research. Like I'm a huge reader of science fiction and fantasy. Like I know the genre, I know the authors. And so I can also daydream a little bit and figure out, well, whose tone is something that's interesting, and who do you think that might be a good fit for our IP? And then it's really about, it still runs through the publisher, so we might recommend a couple of names, but then they'll send us writing samples, and then we evaluate it. And just, again, figure out, well, who is a good fit for telling the type of story that we want to tell. And typically, we work with established authors, so they will have a body of work. And other times we do look at, we're definitely not saying we don't want to work with newer authors, but the demands of writing for an established IP adds like a whole nother layer of complexity to the writer's work, is in my observation of it. Like, if you haven't published a ton of stuff, I think it's another quite a large challenge to try to make sure that you're hitting what the IP requires on top of that. So it's really just, figuring out who do we like the style of, and then having, like, I need to talk to that person, because it's like any other working relationship. I want to make sure that it's collaborative. I want to make sure that I'm going to enjoy the experience, and they're hopefully going to enjoy it too. Don't want to work with, assholes, and as a general rule. So, like, because when we find good partners, it's such a lot of work for the authors themselves to get spun up on our world. So if we find somebody who's into it and who we enjoy working with, we would love to continue that relationship. So it is, it's about relationship building, and it's also about the quality of the work itself. And yeah, so that's how we go about it.
Yeah, I remember when I was working for Dark Horse doing the graphic novels, Ryder Wyndham was my first editor, and one of the comments he made, he says, it is much easier to take a writer and turn them into a fan than it is to take a fan and turn them into a writer. So it's having something that you're bringing to the party other than just wishing you could work on this property is
Yes.
fairly important if you want to get into doing this.
Yeah, and I think that is tricky for a lot of people who want to write for an IP who are fans. It is, you're going to see how the sausage is made, and it might not be very pretty. So, like, there's kind of a reality check I think you need to do for yourself. Like, I wouldn't want to necessarily write for an IP that I love and adore, because I think some of that magic might disappear if I learn too much about it. Like, it's okay, I just want to have that in my mind. So I think it does help for people who can appreciate the game or appreciate the story, but not be fanish about it. That perspective is professional and extremely valued.
Right. Marcin, how about you? I mean, what's the situation? I mean, obviously, if they're going to go work with you, they should probably live in Poland and speak Polish. Are there other prerequisites, things that you look for? How is the situation breaking into the market there?
So I have a very specific approach, because usually I look for people who are not really into games, and maybe they are not exactly science fiction or fantasy fans, but I look for people who like to read, who like to write, and who can prove that they can actually write something that I want to read. And I think it's important because they can think out of the box. And in the games industry, and especially for writers, it's very important, because usually games try to copy another games, and when you browse like Steam or another store with the games, usually the games are very similar. And each time we want to create something, we start with saying that, okay, this time we will do something different and something as original as we can. So let's not think about the games, let's not think about your favorite science fiction or fantasy shows. Let's look outside, and let's look outside the industry and bring something innovative or something fresh. And usually that's where we start.
Very cool. Now, none of us works in a vacuum. Obviously, we're working with it's a collaborative process. We're working with everybody else, whether it's in-house or freelancers, from my perspective. But we have an audience. We have the fans. So what I want to ask, just kind of an indulgement, with the projects that you've worked on, what are the things that really seem to get the fans going? I mean, are there any specific moments that everybody comments on? And then sort of the flip side of that, is there something that you and the team put into a game that you thought was just incredibly cool and nobody seems to notice, or only one or two people notice? So we'll start with Marcin.
Yeah, I have some examples for both situations. So when we were writing The Witcher 3, I was sure from the beginning that the story about the Bloody Baron will be very popular. And I knew that everybody will like it. But on the other hand, there are some quests in The Witcher 3 that didn't really make it, and they are out there, and I was really enjoying them, and I was pretty sure that they will be fantastic and people will love them, but apparently not. And on the other hand, there are some things in The Witcher 3, for example, I don't understand why they are popular. And in specific, there is a really silly side quest about cheese. And everything in this quest is about cheese, including a sword that you can find there. And I don't remember exactly how the sword is named, but it's a cheese name. So everything is about the cheese. And people really love this cheese quest, and I don't know why. Something weird is happening there, and they love it, and I don't know why. I love cheese, but this quest is not really so good.
Yeah,
I miss that.
I'm making a note here. In another short story, do more with cheese.
Yeah.
Apparently, there's a cheese fandom out there. Bonnie, what about you?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of our fans, like, so Gears of War, we're on Gears 5. So we had the original trilogy that was extremely popular. And there are moments from that, such as, spoiler, Dom, who's one of the hero character, Marcus Phoenix, his best friend is Dom Santiago, and his wife, he has to kill his wife. Oh my gosh, it's terrible. It's sad. It's horrible. So people remember that, but they also remember that Dom kills himself to save everyone else in Gears 3. So everyone loves that whole moment of Dom and that friendship. Well, he's dead now. So how do we so the challenge is, figuring out what was it that people loved in those original games and how can we bring it over into the games that we make now? So that kind of, again, comes down to the whole idea about, well, what about that was special and how can we bring those qualities into the next game? It's about friendship. It's about the relationships and taking time to have fun with those relationships. Like, we work really hard to kind of have that tone. We have lots of serious dark stuff, but we also have humor to kind of make the darkness feel darker and to kind of leaven things up. And the humor comes from the character relationships. So Kate is our hero now. She and Dell have a great relationship there. And we have a character named Foz that came in Gears 5 who's, comic relief, but he also is revealed to be a deeper character. So it's trying to figure out, well, fans love the banter, fans love the relationship. That guy's dead. How can we bring that into our games now? But then in terms of like a fun thing, so we have Easter eggs in our game, but one of the ones that still kills me, and fans loved it too, was, so one of my favorite things to do is I get to work with our actors. So Marcus Phoenix is voiced by John DiMaggio, who is a very amazing and experienced actor and everything. And he went on a rant one day. We were talking about tomatoes, and the characters are blowing up tomatoes that he has grown, and they're Dom's tomatoes, like they were from his best friend. And so John just went on a completely profanity-laden rant, and it was so perfect that we kept it. And so it's an Easter egg. If in the greenhouse the player shoots enough tomato plants, then Marcus will freak out, and it's so good. So if anyone wants to look that up, just Google Gears of War 4 Marcus Phoenix tomato rant, and just, if you are easily offended, don't listen, but if you like creative F-bombs, it's good. Yeah.
That is fun. Only two stories that I have. One that got that I enjoyed a lot and got the people who reacted to it reacted really well. I worked on a game called Neuromancer millions of years ago, back in the dawn of time of computers. And so in the thing, you would communicate over a bulletin board system. So you're communicating by text messages and you're reading other people's messages and stuff. And I was doing a bunch of those messages and had the character touch typing. And then there's an accident described where he loses 2 fingers. And every message after that is touch typed. And I just left the last 2 fingers off my left hand, never hit any keys with that. So it was readable, you could understand it. But for anybody who's a touch typist, they're suddenly going, oh my God, this is, yeah. So it was, and I think then the next message is the character had the fingers sewed back on. So there were a few typos with that, but that was a lot of fun. But the weird one, the truly weird one for me, and it's happened in a couple of novels, where you will have a character make a statement that is so stunning and so shocking to the reader that the reader's eyes track over the next page and a half of text and they never comprehend it. And the reason I know is because at conventions, I would always be asked a question that was answered in that last page and a half that the reader, just after the bombshell was dropped, the reader just was not tracking at all. And it's so much fun to know that you have that impact, I think, or that you've got those things sitting there for readers and players and stuff. So we're pretty much closing up, and so we'll go with the one standard question right to the end. If you were going to give somebody advice on what they would want to learn if they want to become a game designer, or things that they might want to look out for, please just go ahead. We'll start with Bonnie.
Okay. At the very basic level, play games. Play any kind of game that you can get your hand on, because we all tell stories in different ways. We all have different storytelling tools at our disposal, and look at the game with a critical eye from a storytelling sense. Like, figure out, why did they decide to tell this scene this way? Why is this dialogue so short? What's going on? So really study and make sure that if you are interested in making games, that you can speak you can show that you respect the genre. And one other thing is, don't hesitate to make your own games. Like Twine, that program that's free, is an amazing thing to just, if you've never done it before, just get your hands wet. And it's a choose your own adventure type situation, but it encourages you to think about choices and how that can affect the story that you tell. So just keep writing. Yeah, that's it.
Marcin?
So Bonnie stole my advice about Twine and about practicing, but I will repeat it. It's very important to try and to practice, and nowadays it's very easy to make a game, especially when you are a writer. You can just make a text game, and when you bring it to someone, when you apply for a job, it's always an advantage for you. But give another advice. So when you play a game, or when you read something, when you watch something, and when you really like it, try to pause it for a moment and try to think, why do you like it? And take a pen and paper and try to write like a bullet points. What did you enjoy? I mean, what are the ingredients in this dish that you are consuming? And repeat it a few times or even more, and maybe not try to copy it, but try to understand it. And it may be important for you, and at some point when you will be working as a writer or as a designer, you can come back to those notes and you can refresh your memory with all those things that made an impression on you.
Yeah, I agree 100%. You have to play the games, you got to read the books, and you got to do so consciously. So you read critically, you think about what the desired effect is, and you think about how to get there. And I think the last thing I'd say is creative industries have an infinite appetite for talent. So learn the basic skills. They will always have a use for you out there. So thank you both for joining us here at the Piper Center. Thank you, Ashley, for setting this up.
Yes, thank you. This was so great. And I appreciate all of you making all these time zones work, and wonderful. So
well, thank you so much for inviting us. I think this was we get to talk about games and writing. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
What else is there?
well, hopefully we will all see each other again sometime in the future, but hope you all have a great rest of your day or evening, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you guys for listening to us.
Absolutely.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.